Why are more people migrating to Linux? As Microsoft keep making Windows a service rather than a useful utility, and Apple keep macOS only accessible to the rich and wealthy, is it any wonder Linux is finally gaining a bit of momentum and attention in the desktop market? Windows 11 saw the introduction of arbitrary minimum hardware requirements. Windows 11 has more telemetry, adware, spyware, and bloat than any other version of Windows in the history of Windows existence. It also has a very uncustomizable taskbar, confusing context menus, with less functionality overall, and the amount of updates that have been reportedly breaking PCs running Windows 11 is an absolute joke. No wonder Linux is becoming a more feasible system to use as time goes by. We are given this substandard shit by Microsoft and Apple, and it ain't cutting it no more. So those companies are going to have to find a way to make their operating systems better, or else they will continue to decline in popularity and give leeway to systems such as Linux and Android. Now Android might be owned by Google, but it's built on the free and open source initiative, meaning any manufacturer can install it and customize it to the way they see things fit. This is also why Android is very fragmented, but that's another story for another video. Microsoft have been going downhill ever since the release of Windows 10 back in July 2015, mainly due to increased concerns over privacy, since Windows 10 was the first version to be Windows as a service. This also meant it had more included tracking and telemetry, which pissed off a lot of privacy nutheads, thus giving leeway for people to migrate to Linux, a free and open source operating system that gives you choice, liberty, freedom, and better privacy. It's also available in a ton of different distributions, also called flavors. While Windows and macOS only have 1 or 2 editions available, and often have a finite life cycle, Windows usually gets 10 years of support, macOS only gets 3, whereas Linux, it depends on the distro you choose. Some get long-term support, while others might only be supported for a matter of months. Windows comes with lots and lots of forced bloat that nobody asked for, so does Apple's macOS, and it's generally near impossible to remove the included bloat. Meanwhile, 99.9% of Linux distributions are clean and free of bloat, thus making Linux a better option for lower-end or older hardware, as you won't be using anywhere near the amount of resources Windows does on that same hardware. Both Windows and macOS are closed source, meaning only the people who work for Microsoft or Apple can study or alter the source code within those systems. Meanwhile, Linux is aligned with the free and open source initiative, so anyone with the technical know-how can get into any Linux distro, study and modify the source code, redistribute it, etc. This also means people can identify malware or potential privacy invasive code before it gets a chance to wreak havoc on any system. This is often the reason bugs and security vulnerabilities get patched quicker on Linux than say Windows or Mac OS. Windows and Mac OS have very strict hardware requirements. Windows 11 forces you to have a TPM 2.0 module, the latest and greatest AMD or Intel CPU, as well as enough RAM, a FE system, not BIOS, and a system capable of secure boot. This also hinders your ability to run Linux or another operating system alongside Windows 11. Great job Microsoft for locking people out from running other operating systems. That's surely going to keep people using your shit, isn't it? I might be a little hard on big tech companies, but the amount of shit they do to us consumers is unfair and wrong, and with the way Windows is headed, things will get so much worse. Just wait till you see the release of Windows 12, with integrated artificial intelligence that will collect literal truckloads of user data. Imagine how much about us Microsoft would know, given that Windows 12 has way more telemetry data collection than Windows 11. Wouldn't that be a nightmare? Yes, it would be. This is why more people are looking at Linux too, because Linux offers privacy nutheads with something that can assure them their privacy and information is safe. Since there is no forced telemetry in just about every Linux distribution out there, some distros like Tails and Whonix take things even further. They run your whole system over the Tor network, which is an anonymous network ran by many hundreds of thousands of volunteers all over the world. These two Linux distributions come with the Tor browser integrated into them, as well as many other privacy-focused tools, like Cleopatra, metadata viewers and scrubbers, password managers, etc. So if privacy is a major concern to you, or you do something where keeping a low profile is necessary, then consider using a Linux distribution such as Tails OS or Whonex. Both are recommended by security experts such as Edward Snowden, a famous whistleblower who leaked NSA documents to the public in June 2013. He was using Tails OS and Tor to achieve this. Just an interesting fact for those of you who didn't know. While Windows has the largest available of native software, and it's arguably the easiest OS to use, its negative connotations are starting to drive people away from it for good. Many of us are growing aware of the increased surveillance states and their tactics to monitor the citizens, and as it becomes more advanced, so will technologies that defend against it. The same goes for operating systems. The more Microsoft shove telemetry and tracking into their system, and the more sophisticated it gets, there will also be people finding workarounds to circumvent them. And if workarounds are not your thing or they are too difficult, then switching to Linux is probably the simplest and easiest thing you can do, although you have to remember that a lot less is available on Linux. It usually comes with its own learning curve, and Linux is not for everyone. I would only recommend it to those of you who are willing to put in the time and effort to learn a new system, and it's also worth noting that you're forced into using free and open source software, as that's the whole emphasis of Linux. So be prepared to say goodbye to Photoshop, Microsoft Office, and other big-name proprietary software. If you're going to switch to Linux, you will have to embrace free stuff. However, I personally think that the majority of the free stuff does a great, if not better job than what their paid for proprietary counterparts do. So even though the thought of ditching Windows or proprietary software might seem daunting, trust me, it's not. Once you get used to using Linux, and free and open source software, you will never regret the day you left Windows or Mac OS for Linux, and traded that proprietary software for free and open source alternatives. As the number of migrating people from Windows to Linux increases, so will the amount of Linux migration guide videos on this channel. These videos are aimed to help those of you migrating from Windows to Linux, and they give you a bunch of useful information on how to migrate to Linux, replace paid for proprietary applications with free and open source ones, etc. So be sure to stay tuned for more Linux migration guide videos to come soon. Alrighty, that's it for this video, folks. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye for now.